Cyber risk doesn't sit still long enough for a board to master it once and move on. The threat evolves faster than most governance structures were built to handle, and AI is only accelerating that pace. Helmuth Ludwig brings a rare vantage point on this challenge. He's chair of Human Ethics Group, a director at Myers Industries, and a director at Hitachi, giving him a front row seat to how different boards are dealing with AI oversight. He joins us to unpack where boards commonly stumble on cybersecurity, why it demands a different lens than other enterprise risks, and how committee structure, board composition, and director education need to evolve to keep pace. Helmuth, from a board's perspective, what does effective cybersecurity oversight look like at the board level today? And where do boards most often get it wrong?
Cybersecurity traditionally has been a little bit in the technology corner, but when you look at it today, it touches really literally every part of the corporation. It touches operations, finance, legal, can have an enormous impact on your reputation. And so effective and efficient cybersecurity, number one, it needs to start with transparency. Do you know where your company stands? Do you have the right processes in place? And you have indicators that, number one, describe where you're standing absolute or relative to other companies, but also, are you getting continuously better? Or you have to assume you're probably never 100% secure that you cannot be breached. So you have to be ready for the time where actually a breach happens, meaning where an unfriendly actor is able to enter your system. And then the key question is, have you trained how to act? Is your company ready to confront the situation? And also, is it able to recover? So the key point here is not only being ready to avoid as much as possible a potential cybersecurity threat, but also to have the resilience to recover adequately. And I think the failure sometimes is really thinking, okay, well, we have some technology guys that will take care of it. We have to recognize it's really literally a business topic, and because of this, relevant for all board members, and all board members should be able to ask the right questions to management regarding the resilience of the company.
How should boards think about cyber risk differently from other enterprise risks, especially given the speed of change and the impact AI has on the threat landscape?
Yeah, maybe let's start with a similarity. When we look at enterprise risk, we always look at impact and probability. And that simple approach, of course, also is relevant for cybersecurity. You want to make sure you understand which type of assets are most important. Where do you have the most critical IP in your company? But whereas the difference is the speed of change. You mentioned already in your question. If you just dial the clock back 2 years ago, from detecting a so-called zero-day vulnerability, meaning where somebody encountered and found an issue in software which allows for an actor to take advantage of it. And having this vulnerability exploited, meaning a bad actor uses it and really enters into your system, there was a time difference of 53 days. Today it's hours, and I would expect in the future it will be minutes and maybe less. We saw this in April when Anthropic was coming out with a new offering, Mythos. And they had to recognize, and shortly before actually release date, that they're, besides being a very powerful generative AI tool, that it also was very powerful in identifying potential threats at companies or opening at companies, vulnerabilities. And they then had to start actually not making it generally available, but making it available only to very selected software companies that tested their software first in a frame of a project called Glasswing, where they made sure that the software, these threats that could be identified, that they could identify them and cover them. This was in April. It took then more than 2 months until reduced methods actually became available. So that already shows the enhanced exposure and enhanced risk. Now, the question is, what can companies do about it? And when I was CIO at Siemens, we introduced a system or a process which is called Zero Trust. And if somebody is more interested in this, NIST has a very good publication about it. And NSA just came out this year with a very detailed description of the approach. But in simple terms, what it means is it means you never trust somebody. Meaning, if somebody walks into your door, you first check identity, and second, you are very clear which type of information, in this case, an individual, is allowed to access. So your salesperson in the UK might have access to the CRM system in the UK, but not to your global ERP system or not to the CRM information in, let's say, North America. Now, what the zero trust means, and there it really becomes very interesting. What it means is you're by identifying certain areas that only are possible for individuals to access, you make sure that you don't get so-called lateral movements. What does that mean? Some of you might remember there's a global retail chain which was attacked, where somebody came into the air conditioning system. Makes a lot of sense. You want to have your air conditioning being maintained and being maintained from another area, so somebody is able to access your air conditioning system. But they were not only able to access your air conditioning system, they could move laterally into your cash register and access credit card information. And this is something you want to avoid. You want to avoid that somebody is able to move from left to right from maybe something which is not a very critical asset to highly sensitive information. And I would recommend any board member to get acquainted with what zero trust really means and what most modern cybersecurity tools allow companies to install and protect their critical assets.
As cyber and AI become more strategic, how should boards think about committee structure, board composition, and director education?
Yeah, so today around 80% of boards have delegated the cybersecurity responsibility to audit committees. Other companies that have so-called risk committees, very often in the finance sector, they have this allocated to the risk committee, another maybe 10%. And the rest is, most of those companies have this at board level. My recommendation would be to use one of the committees, the most adequate one, in many companies, again, the audit committee, as the main driver, but never takes the responsibility away from the whole board. As we discussed before, cybersecurity is really more a business resilience topic, and the whole board has to be has to have full transparency on the situation inside the company. Now, this also requires that every board member has some knowledge. Only about 2% of board members do have deep background in IT or in cybersecurity. And honestly, I think that will not change significantly and probably shouldn't, because board responsibilities are very broad and we don't want to have specialists for every area. At the end of the day, for critical decisions, the whole board has a fiduciary duty to its shareholders. So how do board members really become more informed about cybersecurity? Now, the good news is board members are lifelong learners. They're always, I have not met any successful board member who is not consistently learning. And so my recommendation is always, first, you listen to your teams inside your company. So regular reports from the CIO or your chief information security officer to the board are critical, where they inform about where is the situation, how is the company improving, but also very transparently if something happened, and making sure that you spend the time to afterwards reflect what would you do differently, which are the lessons learned. Secondly, in the boards I'm engaged with, we always have very constructive discussion on cybersecurity with our auditors. They usually do have specialized entities that are more than willing to come in and educate the board on the latest developments. And last but not least, there are many organizations that offer training programs, and I would recommend every board member to at least participate in one of those training programs focused on cybersecurity.
What questions should directors be asking management about cybersecurity and AI that go beyond dashboards and metrics and test preparedness?
Yeah, so number one, I think it's really, do we have transparency where the most critical assets are? Assuming that you can never avoid a breach completely, you want to focus your energy on those areas that are most critical. And critical assets, what does it mean? It means your critical IP, where you have the latest developments. You don't want them to be accessed by an unfriendly actor. Second is personal information. Sensitive information about your employees, sensitive information about your customers. And to have this clearly categorized and then asking the question, how do you specifically protect to your CIO or your chief information security officer, how do you specifically protect this kind of risk, this kind of asset? Second, do you continuously measure how do you improve over time? And this also means, as we discussed already, you want, number one is you want to make sure that you're not visible everywhere. What does that mean? If you think about everybody in your company accesses regularly the internet. And if you do this without a wall in between your company and the internet, everybody can see it and everybody can walk in. It's like walking into an open door or an open window. So what you want to do is, and this is part of the zero trust concept, you want to have practically a wall in front, or as we would call this, a proxy that separates your company from the outside world. It allows you to walk out, but it doesn't allow somebody else to recognize who is out there and to walk through your door practically. Secondly, you want to make sure you don't have these lateral movements, from the air conditioning system to the credit card information. So you want to ask your leadership team, how are you prepared to avoid these kind of exposures and these kind of risks? And then the last part is, which I think is critical, learning from real incidents. Ideally, you learn from incidents that happen to others. These are the best learnings. But make sure you don't avoid learning from your own. Now, you also ask, what's changing with AI? And there it's a fine line to walk, because you don't want to risk that you inhibit innovation. You don't want to say, well, we can't use AI, or we can't use AI agents. And there, specifically with AI agents, we will see practically with all companies, and all the companies I'm involved with, we use AI agents practically on a daily basis. So by taking advantage of the productivity opportunities that agents offer, we also have to make sure that they are protected. And similar to as we do this with humans, you want to give an agent a clearly identification. You want to know which type of access rights the agent has, like a human being. And you want to make sure that the agent cannot access confidential information when it doesn't need to access it for the task on hand that the agent should do. And there it's really good to see the different companies, the generative AI frontier companies like Anthropic have published very interesting papers on how to manage agents with, as I mentioned before, the zero trust concept. And if I would take it together, what's really important is to understand the strategic goal to build an environment where there's less to exploit, where there's less freedom to move around, and less ability for humans or machine to act without explicit authorization.